I'm just going to read the parts, the rundown of the contents of this book. It goes from punk rock in a nutshell, the Reactionary, South Bay, hardcore, The Process, Minutemen, Saccharine Trust, early Pedro punk bands, record labels, Harbor High, miscellaneous haunts, miscellaneous incidents and occurrences, fodder, all roads end in Pedro, shit you hear at parties, Minutemen, corn dogs, Dennis Dale Boone. And may I just end with that all roads do end in Pedro. On that note, I will introduce the, actually, let me just sort of give you a rundown of the program. First, we're going to have a reading by Joel Nolte of The Last, and I just found out, former employee of Foster's Freeze Ice Cream. And after that, we will have the Underground Railroad to Candyland play, and then there will be a book signing afterwards. And I highly encourage you, if you don't have the book, to buy this book, because it's important, and it should be in every public library around the world. Okay, on that note, Joe Nolte of The Last, and again, former Foster's Freeze employee.
The silence so thick you can cut it with a... Yeah, it's true, Foster's. I prepared a little introduction, and it quickly got longer than the thing I'm going to read, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm guessing you can hear me fine, huh? Okay, I'm going to be sort of reading, so my head will be down a lot, which I guess is a blessing for us all. Oh, I could lower it more. Well, anyway, I'm Joe Nolte, and used to be I'm in a band. There used to be a band. And thanks to Craig for, letting me have a little space in this wonderful book. And I'm going to read you my chapter. I've never done this. Oh, I should, yeah.
You're doing great, Joe.
Well, thank you. I should point out I had a stroke last October 10th, which was relatively severe. Ended up in the hospital for over a month, had to relearn to walk. 6 months ago, I was still using wheelchair and walker. So I got to have a taste of old age before its time. And so the fact that I'm standing is actually amazing in and of itself. Thank you, yes. Now that I've lowered your expectations, we can do this. I'd like to tell you about my days in church. Ghosts. I'll show you ghosts. Not around here, though. Oh, no. This place is too damn new for that sort of thing. You need darkness, silence, and a building or two that's been standing for more than 6 months. Look, they've even closed the Altadena Dairy. Jim Limbert used to work there when he was 15, just before Pennywise. No, years before Pennywise. He said he liked it. He could just look across the street and see, oh, right, it's a little different now. There ought to be ghosts on that side of the street. There ought to be indeed. But there's nothing there. Rather, there's far too much there. All those pretty new buildings, just right for all the pretty new inhabitants of this once sacred place. Lots of pretty new bars and restaurants all in a row, all the way down to the sand, all built specifically to attract the mindless hordes from the east who come to spend all their money for the privilege of throwing up in the city of Hermosa Beach. This is where it stood, the church, that nearly abandoned, I can't see it all. Where's my light? Oh, there is a light. Hang on. This could be cool. Sorry. Oh, don't have power? Never mind. Yeah. For some reason. Oh yeah, being old and half blind isn't so good. That would be good. Is that okay? Does that kill the effect? Okay, good. What effect? Yeah. Okay. The church. This is where it stood. That nearly abandoned fire trap that was ever so briefly home to a handful of motley youngsters who just wanted a place to play music as loud as they possibly could. Everything looked different then. You could still take this street that we're on, Pier Avenue, all the way down to the pier. On the left across the street, there was either a bookstore, one of the largest independent bookstores in the South Bay. They tore that down years ago. It is certainly no coincidence that when those in power decide to sacrifice their town upon an altar of greed, they first get rid of all the books. But come, stand right here, try to see it with my eyes. Across from the bookstore on our side of the street was Media Art, where Black Flag, The Descendants, and so many others got their first records. See how it's just steps away from us? That was the most singular attraction of the church. One could literally walk out the front door and be at a recording studio in less than a minute. Pretty cool. It stood right here. Forget about the new building, it doesn't exist. You're really looking at a barely paved parking lot. Look, you can even see the ocean from here. Down the hill over there is Foster's Freeze, where I used to work, and that vacant lot just beyond it is where the old Biltmore used to stand. Finally, back up here, just to the right of you, that's the church. It's been here longer than any of us. It's supposedly some sort of craft center, but you'll have to excuse me because I am on my way to Media Art to start making my first album, and it looks like it's going to rain. Journal entry, Wednesday, February 21st, 1979. Yeah, I know I keep trying to keep up a journal of the last career and it doesn't work, but tonight we begin recording our first album, so I really have to start writing. At 4 p.m. today, we go to Media Arts Studio right here in Hermosa and start recording the album. As we trudge down the street, Greg Ginn from Black Flag appears, and we sit around BSing as a slight drizzle begins. This is when we first learned that Greg has started renting office space in the church. Journal entry, Thursday, August 7th, 1980. These are the circumstances I find myself in. The last progress is nearly stagnated. I'm about to be thrown out of the house. We've been turned down by almost every record company. The church is no more. Between these two journal entries, something happened. You will ask, something wonderful, terrible, earth-shattering, trivial? Now, decades later, I still can't quite decide, but yeah, pretty much all those things. Mostly just a small band of like-minded outcasts huddled together for survival, living underground under relatively dire circumstances in the bowels of an old Baptist church in the middle of Surf City. Yet I don't really want to go there again. Those days are shadows of a world long gone, a time impossibly distant when I was impossibly young. Nowadays, when I do venture out, I move relatively unnoticed and unseen, like a ghost, like a shadow. I am an old and badly made facsimile of someone who used to be someone, barely recognizable as I hide in my own shadows. I watch bands who used to be bands, who may or may not be really there. Fellow shades who alone can see me, and we remember, and the shadows of the long ago past reveal themselves. And all at once it is those days that are more real, and these strange modern times that are now the shadows, and I find myself back there again. There were 3 bands in the Hermosa area back then, the Last, Black Flag, and the Descendants. As far as the rest of the South Bay, Carson had the Zippers, Long Beach had Rhino 39, the Suburban Lawns, Lomita had the Alley Cats, and San Pedro had the Reactionaries. And that was about it as far as decent music between Hollywood and San Diego was concerned. Orange County was beginning to stir, and by the end of summer that seemed to be in high gear, but not yet. As of late February 79, there was no Red Cross yet, no Circle Jerks. Indeed, Black Flag had played just 2 actual shows, and the Descendants and the Reactionaries just one each. There were only these 3 bands in the beach area then, all viewed with much suspicion and hostility. There was, in addition, a fairly small group of friends who would hang out at Black Flag rehearsals, including Jeff and Steve McDonald, Des Cadena, Ron Reyes, Brian Grillo, Greg Hudson, Janet Housden, Jill Jordan, a runaway named Scott, Medea, Mars and Randy, Janice, Jeannie, and Debbie, Mary Ratt, Karen Leuschner, occasionally Chris Trent, and by the end of the year, Rob Slasher, aka future germ Rob Henley, and Mugger. This was the core Hermosa punk contingent, soon to be the core church community. I'm sure there are several, I know there are many, that I've neglected to mention, and I'm sorry for it. I grow old. As far as venues, there wasn't much. There was nothing. It was hard enough finding decent gigs to see in Hollywood. In the South Bay, it was nearly impossible. Outside of a couple of early, noble, and doomed experiments, both in Redondo, fittingly enough. The first was when the true original South Bay scenesters, namely the staff of Backdoor Man magazine, in conjunction with a great Imperial Dogs offshoot called the Zippers, took over a nightclub under the Redondo Beach Pier, known naturally as Under the Pier, in the summer of '77. The Zippers played a lot of the shows and introduced a lucky handful to such bands as the Alley Cats and the Weirdos, who, as I recall, didn't even have a drummer yet. This was truly trailblazing, as the Mask would not even open for another 2 months, and there had been precious little happening before. I'd like to point out the space that was Under the Pier is still there. Amazingly, astonishingly, so many decades later, it's still there. God knows, not much else is. The other experiment was an exploratory booking by another Redondo Beach venue. It was a club called the Smokestack, which existed in a soon-to-be condemned shopping triangle near where the legendary Fox Redondo once stood. They often catered to original bands, albeit somewhat more crowd-pleasingly traditional metal outfits, such as Wolfgang. By early 1978, they had rechristened themselves the Fleetwood and brought Patti Smith out to play on February 10th. It was an interesting bit of closure for this too early and now forgotten scene, as Under the Pier house band the Zippers got to open, and Imperial Dogs frontman and Backdoor Man co-founder Don Waller was actually invited on stage to play during Patti's set. While the show sold out, the Fleetwood was not quite ready to go new wave full time. This is '78. Not in the beach cities, where in 1978 Led Zeppelin still reigned, and anyone not wearing the mandatory long hair, bell-bottomed uniform was viewed with much suspicion and hostility. True, you wore straight-leg pants and you had things thrown at you in those days. No. The church itself was an actual Baptist church built in the 1920s, which sat just off of Pier Avenue, mere blocks from the beach. It had been abandoned, decommissioned, and sold. It was now temporarily being rented out, room by room, to ostensible members of the art community. We would not see much of the church for some time after that first rainy afternoon, mostly since Black Flag were still keeping their old practice space on Aviation Boulevard, and my own band, The Last, was busy that spring recording our first album, LA Explosion. While we were otherwise engaged, the Descendants will play their second and last gig with my brother David singing lead at a party in Long Beach, which turns into a biker brawl. And a St. Patrick's Day show with the Alley Cats, Go-Go's, and X will turn into Los Angeles' first full-scale punk rock riot. The gas shortage will hit epidemic proportions, peaking on May 6, 1979, when not a single gas station in the South Bay is able to open. I actually noted that in a journal at the time. Insane. Then on June 17th, Redondo's Fleetwood opens its doors to the aforementioned Go-Go's and Alley Cats. Unfortunately for the club, the bill also includes those fun-loving and ministers of mayhem, the Germs, as well as the Plugs and the Bags. Even more unfortunately for the club, a new scene has erupted down south, behind the orange curtain. A bunch of teenagers in Huntington Beach have discovered punk rock. They are quickly met with the same hostility we have encountered, but down there it's a little different. There are more of them. They have sufficient numbers to fight back, thus rather quickly developing a survivalist sort of gang mentality, which manifests itself on this particular Sunday. For the South Bay locals, it is simultaneously the scariest and most refreshing thing they have ever seen. You got to consider that there were about 20 of us in Hermosa. So it was eye-opening. It certainly scares the Fleetwood. It'll be some time before they will attempt anything remotely similar. Though when they do, it will take off with a vengeance. 1980 will see an impressive array of legendary lineups at the Fleetwood, even as some of us are taking a step or two back from it all. At any rate, we're still in '79. If I start making everything run really long, just like throw something at me, I'll know to stop then. Cool. Let's see. '79, now it's summer. Black Flag's first single, Nervous Breakdown, has begun to attract attention. Actually, this time, me and Jeffrey Lee Pierce ended up at Kickboy's place in Venice, and he had the Nervous Breakdown single glued to his turntable, which I thought was pretty cool. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of available venues for Black Flag to play at. As it happens, we, The Last, have an upcoming show at a new pop club called the Hong Kong Cafe. Look, they wanted to be like Madame Wong's too. Seriously. Located right across the square from Madame Wong's in Chinatown. As this club has left the choice of opening act to us, we tell them we know this great new power pop band called Black Flag. They buy it. It is the night after the Fleetwood show. Predictably, all hell breaks loose. Keith Morris walks in, and yes, Keith was the singer for Black Flag in those days. Yes, we know. Keith Morris walks in, sees an array of happy little tables and chairs in front of the stage, designed presumably for happy little pop kids to sit and listen quietly to the happy little music. Keith, not so happy, starts tearing tablecloths off tables and throwing chairs all over the place. Scared the waiters. The remainder of the evening follows a predictably similar path. The Hong Kong people are furious with us for bringing Black Flag and vow to screen all future acts. They ban us. Yeah. Within a month or two, they will have done an about-face and start booking only hardcore punk acts. Yeah, it took 1 month. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, most of us finally get our first look at the inside of the church. It is now July 12th, 1979. Black Flag have, as I recall, just been kicked out of their practice space on Aviation Boulevard and have therefore rented a second space at the church just for practicing. Tonight they invite us all down to break in their new digs. A riotous party commences and Black Flag play for hours as vocals are shared by myself, Rod Reyes, Des Cadena, and others. How prescient. I dimly recall slamming very hard into a board from which the pointy ends of several nails were protruding, repeatedly. The next night, Black Flag gets to play the original Mask, which is illegally opening its doors for one night for a Mau Mau's party. A police riot brings the evening to an early but hardly unexpected halt. It's Friday the 13th. Black Flag bassist Gary McDaniel, a.k.a. Chuck Dukowski, has rented yet a third room at the church. A fourth, a large basement below street level, has also been made available. Anyone who has seen the first Decline movie will know whereof I speak. Ron Reyes has been living in the Cadena's garage, but he and Des have had a falling out, and so he is thinking. I'm about to be thrown out of my mom's house in Hermosa, and so I am thinking as well. And so on July 22nd, I pack my things, pick up Ron and his things, and together we move into the basement of the church. Then it's off to Pollywog Park in Manhattan Beach, where Black Flag, still unknown enough to get away with it, have again presented themselves as a power pop band. Or maybe it was soft jazz this time. What subsequently transpires is actually not nearly as chaotic or terrible as it will soon be made out to have been. The crowd of mostly young parents, jocks, and other conservative types mostly laugh it off and give their children every empty beer cans to go throw at the punk rockers. Go on, they like it. Do it. It was hilarious. I remember Keith Morris saying, "Oh, I'm sick, I'm going to throw up right on this little kid." And everybody laughed. It was, it was fun. It was a strange, separate piece in a ode to become so much more separatist time. None of this in the chapter. Okay, everyone's in relatively good humor, although it is clear that neither side likes the other very much. It is relatively calm. A separate piece before the genuine riots that lay ahead. We do decide to leave quickly at the end, as some attendees seem a little less amused than others, but no one gets hurt or arrested, and we all end up back at the church, where Black Flag plays on the main stage, and I test the hardiness of the church floor with my skull. Actually, Des pushed me. Let me hasten to add that. 3 nights later, Ron almost gets killed when he and a couple of others crash a surf hippie party on 4th Street, yank the Jimi Hendrix record off the turntable, and crank up Black Flag's Wasted, which promptly begins to skip so that it repeats, "I was a hippie," over and over. Amazingly, they survived. 5 nights later, we have the first of the legendary church basement parties. Being below street level, you can essentially blast music at ridiculous volumes down there, and no one can hear a thing outside. It is a dream come true. I'm sorry. Black Flag played, the last play, the Urinals played their first show outside of UCLA, I think. The Gears played their first show ever, I think. And a young band called The Tourists played their last show ever. Lots of Hollywood people there. 2 days later, Black Flag goes to Hollywood for a Slash magazine interview. Robo doesn't want to go, so Ron impersonates him. Again, prescient. A week later, the Lasts have a billboard on the Sunset Strip, and our album is released. We now have, this would be mid-August of '79. We now have songs in regular rotation on K-Rock. currently the only Los Angeles radio station that will play anything good, and better billings, larger draws, and a billboard in Hollywood. At the same time, I am sleeping on a rat-infested couch in a basement in an abandoned church with no hot water. Living a dream. Ron and I live in the basement, while Greg, Ginn, and Medea now live in the space upstairs on the main floor. This floor also boasts a large empty area that was once presumably an altar, pews, and congregation, and is now the main stage. But performances here are rare, as a police response is almost guaranteed. Around back, there's another room where Black Flag practice, and then a second floor upstairs where Chuck has a room, which is soon taken over by Scott the Runaway. Robo still lives in El Segundo, but will have taken up residence by early 1980. Other residents come and go, and such as my brother David and Rob Henley, whereas Mugger will, I believe, stay until the very end and beyond. It is the summer of the knack. My Sharona starts taking off in June, and that impossible to eradicate beat has been the soundtrack to a most interesting summer. This is good and bad. It is good because suddenly labels are falling all over each other trying to sign local bands. This in turn has led to a surge of interest in local live music, and by August there is at least one good show every night of the week. Absolute truth. Impossible though it may be to believe in these times. One good show every night of the week and multiple great shows on weekends. It is bad because my roommate Ron Reyes has just purchased a drum set and thinks it is very amusing to play that My Sharona beat over and over and over. Black Flag have landed a dream gig, opening for Fear the Germs and UXA in Culver City. Unfortunately, at the last minute, Robo disappears. They have to cancel. They do, however, still have an upcoming date at the now punk-friendly Hong Kong Cafe and have asked the tourists to open. Naturally, the tourist drummer disappears about this time. Ron sits in with them on August 28th, and I suggest they keep him and change their name, which no one likes. I suggest the Sick. No one likes that either. At one point, somebody, for a joke, suggests Red Cross. Oh, okay. On September 1st, the night before the Hong Kong gig, Black Flag and UXA attempt an impromptu and illegal concert at Mars Studios in Hollywood. Black Flag sets up, then the police show up and arrest the owner for, no permit. So Black Flag starts playing anyway, and 10 seconds later, all the power goes out. As we all spill out down the alley, a local starts taunting us, and Ray Pettibone jumps in, and they begin going at it. I cannot stand idly by. I have to stop it before someone gets hurt. I have to stop it to prevent a riot. But mostly, I have to stop it because Ray is my ride home. The next night, Black Flag and the newly christened Red Cross play the Hong Kong. Ron completely demolishes his drums at the end of the set. 2 days later, the Los Angeles Times runs an article on what it refers to as Huntington Beach punk gangs. The next day, an armed jewel thief takes refuge in the church. He is shot dead by Hermosa's finest, one of whom 5 minutes earlier trained a rifle on me. I'm eternally grateful to Hermosa's finest for looking before they shot. The next night, on September 6th, I produced Red Cross's first demo at Media Art Studios, the one just half a block away from the church. They'd saved up to buy the time, but they had no one to produce. Then they got signed. Posh Boy signed them, didn't like the recordings, made them redo it. I think one song ended up on the Life is Ugly compilation. The rest are lost to the antiquities of time. The night after that, my brother David and I record some preliminary stuff with Ron and Dez. It is never finished. The day after that, David produces the first Descendants single, Ride the Wild, It's a Hectic World. 2 days later, someone leaves a sculpted head with the words punk painted on it and a knife driven through it on the front porch of the church. It's a lovely thing to wake up in the morning and see. It goes on and on. David Bowie catches Black Flag and the Germs at the Hong Kong. The police begin to show up regularly to harass us and remind us that we are not well liked in Hermosa. Gee, really? Shocking. Red Cross gets signed, but have to re-record as Posh Boy doesn't like my production. Flipside and Slash each do features on the church. On September 24th, a mysterious fire erupts outside and back of the church, the side closest to the water. Des and I run for help, and later learn we are prime suspects in the case. Black Flag, the Gears, and Red Cross play King's Palace in Hollywood. Greg Hudson pours a pitcher of water on Jeff McDonald, who screams that his Penelope Houston button is ruined. Singer for the Avengers. Everyone caravans up to San Francisco, October 10th. Whew! Odd serendipity there. To see Black Flag with the Dead Kennedys at the Mabuhay. Black flag graffiti mysteriously appears all over the city the following morning. Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys is running for mayor. And in truth, Jello, along with the rest of us, was responsible for the graffiti, which I couldn't say in print for obvious reasons, but yeah. Who did win that election? Anyway, the Descendants are scheduled to play a club in Orange County called the Renaissance Cafe, but Bill can't get out of the house. Ron and Greg Hetson go down anyway and come back raving about some new band called Agent Orange. The next night, a Huntington Beach band called the Screws is invited to play in our basement. They bring along 100 of their closest friends. Now imagine this invasion of this 1 to 200 people party in your bedroom. We were young. Let's see. Black Flag do 2 shows on Halloween night, one with the Germs and the other at Blackie's, where for $2, $2, you can see Black Flag, the Urinals, Descendants, Red Cross, and the debut of Ella and the Blacks. Ella is future Flipside writer Karen Leuschner, and her band includes Des Cadena, the McDonald Brothers, Mary Rat, Mary Weens, and a couple of others who I'm mortified not to remember. They are amazing. Early November sees more Orange County parties in the church basement. Who was? I think the Klan played there. It was interesting times. Then the last of Black Flag returned to the Hong Kong with Fear and the Urinals, breaking a house record set the previous week by X. Our drummer, Jack Reynolds, quits that night, and within the week, Keith has quit Black Flag. Ron quits Red Cross immediately to replace Keith, and so Greg Hetson also quits Red Cross, and before Christmas, he and Keith have already begun to put together the Circle Jerks. So yeah, essentially as 79 ends, the entire fiber of the Hermosa contingent is rent asunder and reformed in new and odd ways. Well, on December 15, we host our largest party yet. This time the police actually catch wind of it and turn out in force, sending all of us scrambling to the 4 corners of the South Bay. The following night, the Hollywood police, not wanting to be upstage, will break up a Black Flag concert at Blackie's. Rob Henley, Mugger, and occasionally others have become fixtures in the basement. It's getting a little crowded in many ways. There are enough new people and bands coming and going that I'm able to fairly easily fade into the shadows. As 1980 hits, I spend less and less time at the church. It's pretty much turned into a crash pad for a new crowd, and the focus of most of the action has shifted to Hollywood and other faraway places, where Black Flag have entered into an endless game of cat and mouse with just about every police department this side of Bakersfield. The South Bay will certainly get its share of the action, but that focus has shifted slightly south to where the Fleetwood has now embraced the heart. We almost play there later with Black Flag. Indeed, I almost joined Black Flag. And no recordings exist, regrettably. I almost joined Black Flag after Ron quits, but neither of these things are in the cards. I find new couches to sleep on and watch my own band go into a rather rapid decline, and I know there's probably nothing that can be done to stop it. It was a hell of a season, but it's over now. It's all gone, and in a fitting coda, a final party is held at the church in the late summer of 1980, and everything is destroyed. At the conclusion of these festivities, Black Flag get in the van and leave town forever. You wanted ghosts? You're talking to one. And nowadays, when I do venture out, I move relatively unnoticed and unseen, like the shade I have become. But what lovely mischief we once made.